Question: is there anything beyond the objective world?
Consider this. Most of a person's life is spent focusing only on the objects of this world. Take the body, for instance, which we consider ourselves to be. It's just another object in the world. People's entire lives revolve around these objects. They spend all their time looking at this body, looking at other bodies and objects. But almost never in their lifetime does a person pay attention to the one who is looking at these objects. And so, people get the impression that the world is just a succession of objects. Life moving from one object to another. If you're lucky enough to stumble upon this idea, you begin to shift your focus. You realize that there is more than just the object. There is something called attention, that which observes and is aware. Take hands, for example. They are observed, and there is an observer. And so, the observer cannot be an object, as an object cannot step back. It must be a subject. Suddenly, you shift your attention to the act of being attentive, and you notice it. You recognize this attention once you distance yourself from objects. Previously, your life revolved around moving towards objects. But then, you pushed away from all objects, like plunging into water. Imagine sinking, searching for the bottom to push off and rise again. There might be nothing to push against, similar to diving to the very bottom, only to push off from it, which propels you a few meters upward more easily. In this way, objects can act as the bottom from which we push off towards awareness. And as this realization dawns, you recognize that you are not just this body. You are something more, someone who observes it, who is aware. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, the entire world exist within it. You discover that attention is everywhere. It's between objects, and all objects are in it. But after discovering this by distancing yourself from objects, you might initially think like this. Seeing attention everywhere seems to mean not seeing it in objects. It's as though attention is everywhere, yet it is the very thing in which everything exists. But think about this. For about 20, 30 years, we've lived perceiving only a world of objects, convinced that's all there is. Suddenly, your focus shifts, and you find yourself having to somewhat disengage it from everything. Why? Because this shift, this move from focusing on objects to being aware of awareness itself, can easily become obscured. You might not even realize you're reverting to the belief that only a world of objects exists. You need to keep coming back to this awareness again and again. It's essential. In this constant return to the understanding that attention is more than an object, you may sense a division between attention and objects, but it's not a stark division. You become conscious of the attention that envelops everything. Objects may still appear somewhat distinct, as though they exist within this attention. You might not fully grasp that they, too, are part of it. Yes, this is the process you must undergo. It's a matter of contrast. Initially, we perceive only objects. Then we perceive as attention. When you only perceived objects, you did so as the body, as part of the world. This means that I, as the body, see the world, and thus I can only see objects. But if suddenly I perceive the world not as the body, but through the attention from the body, I begin to see not just objects, but the attention encompassing these objects. So, at this moment, I no longer see as the body. We need to experience this to unlearn our personal perception, which is accustomed to seeing only objects. Once this happens, attention and objects no longer seem different. They become one whole, and it's impossible to label them separately because they are not just attention or objects, but both. Suddenly, attention exists because of objects, and objects exist because of attention. They need each other, for without objects, attention wouldn't know it exists. Thankfully, objects give us the opportunity to push towards awareness. This can be seen as a form of self-awareness. You awaken, realizing that you exist here as attention, not as an object, and that there's more than just objects. From that point, you must constantly be in this state. Otherwise, you risk losing it. It's like losing the presence of being more than just an object. But eventually, the habit of seeing only objects will disappear, as the habit of perceiving the world as attention becomes stronger. Once this happens, they suddenly become one and the same. Then I see both the object and its context. For example, I look at a pole and see the pole, but I don't see it in isolation. I see it as something existing within attention. In my life, there's no longer a separation between object and background, because both the background and the object need each other to exist. Because, imagine, if we were to travel into space, and in space, there were no objects at all, just darkness. At that moment, as someone in space, you would call it emptiness. That's why I say that if all objects disappear, attention also ceases to exist. But that's impossible, because the first object never just appeared out of nowhere. There has always been an object and attention, always. Alternatively, it could be said that neither an object nor attention ever existed. But the point isn't that they never existed. It's that they have always been one and the same. When I say that neither the object nor the subject exists, it doesn't mean they don't exist at all. It means they never existed independently of each other. They have always existed together. And if they have always existed together, why separate them into one or the other? They are always the essence of the same thing. This is true, without a beginning and without an end. Attention is like how you try to define yourself, starting from an object. Attention is one of the attempts to name yourself, not as an object. And the one who sees all these objects knows about their own existence because of the objects. Like, for example, when I stand in front of a mirror, I stand in front of the mirror and I see a reflection of myself. Right now, as I look into the camera, I see my reflection. It's through seeing this reflection that I know of my existence. It's because of this reflection. If I suddenly step away from the camera, the reflection disappears. At that moment, I wouldn't know that I exist. Just like this, I immediately know that I exist. It's this reflection that lets me know it. But then we delve into the reflection and start to realize as who we exist. So first, you might switch to the fact that you are this attention. Let it be so. This is necessary to shed the identity you've become accustomed to, one that limits you to being just among objects. But ultimately, of course, there's no difference between this and that. That is the truth.